listening to the Paul Harrell Program, brought to you by Conduit Media Group.
We've got Senator Linda Collins-Smith with us. Welcome back. We got Congressman Rick Crawford is with us. Rick, thanks for coming back on, sir.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
I do want to get to the pressing issue of Obamacare repeal and replacement that happened yesterday. But first, in Northeast Arkansas, I mean, we're facing some major flooding. What have you heard about that? What's being done to try to help some of these folks?
Well, we actually had, we're working on a number of fronts. Number one, I understand, the epicenter of this is really Randolph County, but it's not limited to Randolph County and Black River, Current River, 11 Point River. It's also affecting the White River, the Cache River, and other parts of the district. So, all the way down into Monroe County, at least, we know that we're seeing the effects of this and more and more rain. We had actually a aerial tour scheduled this morning that just got that was canceled at about 8 o'clock this morning due to the high winds, because we don't want to be out flying in unsafe conditions. And the best way, obviously, to get eyes on this situation is by air, and unfortunately that didn't work out this morning. We're looking at an alternate plan. In the meantime, though, we've been on the phone I've talked personally to the Ag Secretary, and we're trying to work out the logistics to get him here on Sunday so that he can look at it. And it's, yes, I know that it's not just farmers that are being affected, but he is a representative of the administration. Having him here is important, that somebody in the administration gets eyes on this, and he is doing everything he can to try and get here on Sunday. And so hopefully we'll have that happen, and then he'll have a better perspective on just how far and wide the effects are. This is probably worse than 2011. And, in 2011, we thought we were looking at a 100-year flood, and it turns out we're looking apparently at a 6-year flood. These cycles are a little scary, but this is something that's going to be very, very difficult. It's going to have a very negative effect for our farmers, and that's putting it mildly, on top of some of the policy requirements that we're going to try to ask waivers for. On if we get an opportunity to replant, we can't force farmers to replant rice at this point in time for a variety of reasons, and so we're going to have to go to the department, ask for a waiver, so that if they can replant, it's something that beyond forcing them to replant rice. We've lost probably at this point. I'm going to say maybe 10% of our rice crop in Arkansas, and that equates to about 5% of the nation's rice crop because we produce it in such abundance here. So that's going to be significant. So they'll have to follow that up. If they get an opportunity to replant, it certainly shouldn't be rice due to the lost yields that you get from a late planting. And so it's not to mention the fact it's not just rice, it's also some corn and some expensive field work that went into, preparing to plant. And so there's been many passes made over the fields in anticipation of planting that amounted to, just economic loss. So we're very aware of what's going on, and we're doing everything we can to get the right people in the right places to make sure that there's some a full accounting of what's taking place and what we can offer in terms of assistance.
Yeah, it is, you've got people who are losing property, losing crops. Talked to a farmer last weekend. He said, with the weather, a lot of times, it's like a chess match. But that levee broke, and you've got the town of Pocahontas. I mean, the aerial photos that I have seen are you just can't believe it, And then you find out that parts of Walnut Ridge a day or so ago flooded as well, and you're just, I had no idea it could be as bad as it is. Governor Asa Hutchinson has deployed the National Guard to combat Arkansas's flooding now as well. So it's good to see everybody, kind of operating on all cylinders here. But I know there's a lot of folks that certainly need our prayers right now.
Oh, no question about it. That's important, and we don't want to overlook that. Certainly want folks to be praying. But I've said this before, and I think I've said it on your show. What the intersection of prayer and action, great things can happen. So let's do both. and do what we can to make sure that we're and right now, it seems like people are going to be thinking about what can we do to help folks. And at this point in time, there are 500 evacuations in and around Pocahontas. There have been, as you mentioned, National Guard troops deployed to assist. There are somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 water rescue vehicles. There are folks taking shelter in a former nursing home. I think they have about 33 in a former nursing home right now. So we're talking about people who've lost their homes and don't have anywhere to go. And so what can we offer them beyond our prayers, which we certainly covet, but what can we offer them right now? We're looking at, I don't have any sources of where a particular account is being set up to administer funds, but when we have that, we'll certainly put it out on our website, probably ask our friends in the media to share that as well. And so I think in the short term, we're going to be looking at money to try and help folks. What we can do also is, drinking water is important, and personal items, personal hygiene products, towels, things of that nature that are just sort of things that we take for granted day in, day out, but that make a difference. It's the world to you when you don't have it. And so those types of things, and as soon as we can find out who the administrators are going to be of some of these relief accounts and relief efforts, then we'll certainly share that.
Okay, yeah, and I'll certainly reiterate that to this audience. We're talking again with Congressman Rick Crawford. I know this is less pressing now, and I mentioned this yesterday, but the 100,000 acres of rice, 10% of the rice crop, they say could go a little higher than that acre-wise. I mean, that's going to be an economic blow. I mean, would you agree with that to the state of Arkansas?
Oh, there's no question. Yeah, there's no question that we're all going to feel the effects of this. Obviously, the farmers are going to feel it directly. They're going to be directly impacted, but that's the nature of, the economic impact that we generally overlook and don't really fully appreciate as folks who live in the 1st District of Arkansas. The fact is there are only around 2% of the population, actually less than 2% of the population in the nation that are engaged in producing our food and fiber. And so we don't give it, its full credit in terms of the economic impact that it's responsible for. But I can promise you this, we are going to feel it, not just the farmers, not just the seed dealers, not just the equipment dealers, but everybody in Northeast Arkansas will start to feel the ripples of this. Everybody in East Central Arkansas and Southeast Arkansas will start to feel the ripples impacting them to some degree. Now, some are going to be hurt worse than others, depending on where your community is located. But the fact of the matter is, we're talking about a pretty major part of our economy that's taken a pretty significant hit. And so it's important to note that this is. I don't care if you're engaged in agriculture or not. You should be aware of just how damaging this is to our economy, but also think about the personal loss that people are suffering with regard to their homes, their land, potentially their livelihoods, and things of that nature. So we need to be very prayerful and very active in trying to help these folks.
The other news of the day is what you guys did yesterday. The quote repeal and replace of Obamacare. You did vote for it. The way I see it, there's basically three issues of this. You've got the coverage aspect of it, which, by the way, the left is just, they're in meltdown mode. I want to read one tweet real quick, which I wish, because I really like this actor, Mark Ruffalo. Well, I like the Incredible Hulk, Mark Ruffalo. And he said that, let's see, we have it right here. Dear Make America Great Again Americans, making people die without insurance while the rest of the world enjoys coverage doesn't make America great again. So the left is already saying that that you guys are making Americans die. So there's the coverage aspect, then there's the tax aspect, and then there's the Medicaid aspect. Would you agree that that's kind of the three pillars here?
Oh, I agree. That's probably the narrative of the left. There are obviously what we're trying to do is get past the idea that if you've got an insurance card, then you are magically covered. And sleep soundly tonight because you've got Obamacare coverage. Well, that's awesome, except most people can't afford it. So you've got this coverage that, the insurance card that says you're covered, but people aren't using it because the premiums are so high, the deductibles are so high that, most people that were, kind of middle of the road, middle America, middle income folks, working people that's sort of the position they're in. And so when we started this whole Obamacare nightmare back in 2009, really back then there was only about 10% of the population that we really needed to address in terms of if you're trying to achieve universal coverage. But in that 10%, I think it wasn't given adequate and appropriate, accurate consideration about what about that 10%? Are those 10%, do they want health care coverage? Have they made a conscious decision to forgo health care coverage? And in many cases they did. It's a large portion of that 10% may have been very affluent, may have been young, and just were at a point in their life where they didn't want to spend the money on health care. And so my point is this, that we upended health care for the sake of 10% of the population that we didn't have a full accounting of in the first place. And so now the left is an absolute, a downward spiral. And some of the stuff, the calls that we got in our office, unbelievable. You're going to say that that rape is a pre-existing condition, that a C-section is a pre-existing condition, that domestic abuse is a pre-existing condition. Are you kidding me? I mean, come on, man. This is another attempt by the left to reignite the coals on the war on women narrative.
Yeah.
I mean, they have nothing substantive to offer about this. What this is all about is the continual attack on the Trump administration, using every proxy they can, every policy they can to discredit and demean and deteriorate the Trump administration. And at some point in time, they've got to get over that and start to recognize that we need to govern and we need to do the things that the American people asked us to do. And one of those things was Obamacare repeal and replace. And, look, the first iteration I wasn't for. I think we got it right the second time. I'm glad to see that they listened. And,
yes.
We went back to the drawing board and we got some things that that I believe are going to make a measurable difference. And we also know that the Senate is going to do some things because they've got a different set of rules. And so they're the ones that are going to help navigate through this process based on the rules and the constraints that are applied to them in that body. So we don't know what the final product is going to look like, but I can tell you this, it's going to look a heck of a lot better than what we currently have.
I certainly hope so, and I hope this actually goes a long way to start lowering costs, lowering premiums, because that I feel like is going. It won't matter what the media, the leftist media, or these celebrities say if Americans can now, working Americans can now actually afford to purchase health insurance. I love the fact, as I'm reading about it, that it would allow. It will allow states to opt out of Obamacare's requirement that insurers cover health benefits like maternity care and stuff like that. I mean, that's common sense. I don't need maternity care. I'm a dude. So
right. Well, that's the whole thing is that, what they were trying to do is, make everybody pay for things that they didn't need, and the idea being that somehow it was going to make it cheaper for everyone. And we see that just simply fell short of the mark. Way short of the mark. It didn't work, and so I think it's reasonable to think we go back to the drawing board and go, how do we fix that? The other thing was the community rating, and the idea that we're going to just totally throw people out on their ear, pre-existing conditions. Well, look, there's very clear language in there. We've been very sensitive to the issue of pre-existing conditions, but now you've got the left, as I mentioned before, throwing at this argument about things that nobody's ever even talked about or considered or even remotely related to a pre-existing condition that rape or domestic abuse. What? I mean, where's that coming from?
I don't know.
It's just there's no There is no logic behind their arguments, and it just means that they're now grasping at straws. Look, we've got provisions in there to address pre-existing conditions, even for the states that opt out of the community rating and the 10 essential benefits. You've got to set up the high-risk pools, and the high-risk pools are going to receive more money due to the Long and Upton Amendment. And so we've addressed that, and we've addressed it very efficiently, I believe, to make sure that the pre-existing conditions issue is a non-issue.
Yeah.
They're just nuts about oh heck, we can't let this be seen as a victory or a success. And if you were watching the vote play out on TV yesterday, they were chanting or singing, such as it was, "Hey, hey, goodbye."
The Democrats were
after the vote passed. Yeah. So it's like, okay, this is not student council. This is the Congress of the United States. So I think we should conduct ourselves with a little more decorum than that.
That is ridiculous. So they're essentially trying to say, because you guys are doing this, a lot of you are going to lose power. Now, I mean, I think that fear kind of worked with 20 of your Republican colleagues. They're at least, some of those members were worried that, hey, they may lose power by voting for this. But that's only because I think they have faith in, the media narrative. I mean, like you just said, it will provide states with $100 billion largely to fund high-risk pools to provide insurance to the sickest patients. So that's, pre-existing conditions. The bill would also provide $8 billion over 5 years to help those with pre-existing conditions. I mean, that is something that they just they want to completely ignore. They're just going to go with, well, because you're changing Obamacare or replacing Obamacare, repealing it or whatever, that it's going to be much, much, much worse than things are now. And what they ignore is people can't afford the product. I mean, isn't that why they talk about the individual mandate? What happened with that? Because the fact that they made healthcare so unaffordable, it kind of reveals the reason why they had to force everyone to buy it.
Right. Well, listen, this is in the simplest terms. It's just like your car. You don't have to have car insurance. It's just that you have to have car insurance if you're going to register your vehicle. Okay, so that's the thing. But you only have to have liability. You don't have to have comprehensive.
Yeah.
But you run your car into a tree and you don't have insurance. You don't get on your cell phone and call your local agent and say, hey, I want to get car insurance. And then say, okay, you're covered. Oh, by the way, I just ran into a tree. They're not going to cover that. Okay, but guess what? You do get to go to the hospital. They're not going to, not see you at the hospital. So there's a little bit of a difference there. But what they're trying to say is that we're going to force you. The individual mandate essentially says we're going to force you to buy a product whether you want it or not. I think it's a little apples and oranges comparison here. Driving, not everybody drives, and nor is there anything in the Constitution that says you should be allowed to drive. But there's also, I believe it's unconstitutional to force people to buy a product against their will.
Yes.
And that's ultimately what they were driving for, was to try and get everybody to a point where it's a battle of attrition. Everybody just throws up their hands and says, well, you win, socialists. We're gonna go down this road to socialized healthcare, single payer system, because we just lost the battle, and I'm just, that narrative is starting to wear pretty thin. The reality is, if you want to point to Europe, we don't need to be emulating Europe because somehow they're more erudite thinkers. And have you seen Europe lately? I mean, they're in complete disarray. So we need to do things like Americans do things. There's a reason why we're an exceptional nation. There's a reason why we're the United States of America. There's a reason why everybody wants to come here. And we don't need to try and emulate policies of nations that struggle with things like this and point to that as a success story, because I don't view that as a success story. I view the American legacy of, individual freedoms as a success story, and that's the thing that we ought to embrace.
I agree with that. We're talking with Congressman Rick Crawford. Just a few more questions. First of all, I just want to say thank you for voting to support this, because this is why you were elected, in 2010, and I know that you know that. And I just want to say thank you. Number one. Number two, is there more work to be done concerning, Obamacare and, getting rid of it and putting something in its place? Or are we still talking about, different phases in the future to address this?
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, we have to look at, what the Senate gets done and what this potentially looks like when the Senate is through with it because of the Byrd Rule reconciliation. And I want to remind folks that this was the method by which Obamacare was delivered. And so it has to be undone this way because to do a wholesale single piece of legislation repeal would require 60 votes in the Senate. And that's just not realistic. Now, if we had a 60-vote majority in the Senate, it would still be difficult because you're going to have 1, 2, 3, or maybe more Republicans that are like, I don't know, just like you had 20 in the House that were like, I don't know about this.
Yeah.
And kind of got cold feet. And that's fine. Look, I'm not questioning they're good people, and they've got to go home and square that with their constituents. And if that's they're reflecting the will of their constituents, then more power to them. But that's the scenario. So even if we had a 60-vote threshold, it doesn't necessarily mean we could do a single, wholesale, full-scale repeal in one fell swoop. So it's going to have to be done piecemeal. We're going to have to use the reconciliation method to undo it. And so it's long-term. It's not going to be turn on the light switch and boom, it's gone, and now move on to the next thing. So this is going to be a drawn-out process, but this is the first and I think most important part of it. And in the bigger picture, what it does, it frees up $1 trillion in tax reform. And that's the next big lift.
Yeah, so that's my last question. What about tax reform later this year? What are you hearing about that?
Well, this went a long way to help boost that. And my concern on tax reform is there's a whole lot of good things in there. There's some things that I have some concerns with. And, of course, the naysayers are saying, well, this isn't paid for. Well, I get that, you want to see offsets, and there are some offsets in there, but the offsets are going to be realized when we see more economic growth because this happens invariably. It's been proven time and again. And, even JFK said this about, tax relief, a rising tide lifts all boats.
That's right.
And so when we start to see more economic activity, you're going to start to see more revenues at the federal level. So, look, we're trying to get more money in more people's pockets. And look, the reality is that you can't just say, if middle class tax relief is our goal, then that's great, and I'm for that because I'm middle class. I don't have a bunch of investment income, and I live in a simple house in Jonesboro, and this is my home, and I think most of your viewers and I are just alike in that regard, our listeners rather, in that regard. But just because middle class Americans get a tax break doesn't mean everybody else shouldn't get a tax break.
Right.
And so what happens is we focus on, okay, well, you're going to drop the corporate tax rate down to from 35, which is ridiculous and makes us uncompetitive in the global marketplace. We're going to bring that down to 20 or 15%. How can you do that? Rich people are going to get a break. Well, rich people are the ones that provide the jobs. And if we're not doing some things to help level the playing field in the global marketplace, then we're going to continue to see anemic economic growth. And so, look, the members of that corporations, and the other term, when you say corporations, you automatically invoke this evil image of, these people that are just sitting back, greedy, counting their money and sticking it to the American people. That's not true. These are people that are employers providing jobs and economic impact in the communities.
A lot of them small business owners.
There are corporations. Yeah, and that's the bulk of corporations in this country are companies that are 500 employees or less. And, I mean, that's the vast majority. But all together, knitted together, this is a huge economic engine. And so you've got to give some consideration to the fact that we got to provide some relief there as well, not just not just to the middle-income taxpayer.
I agree.
I'm
And putting people, and I would just say putting people in groups and just being obsessed with our differences. I mean, that's what they do on the left, and I'm sick of it. I'm glad that you're making that observation. And look, I was excited. I mean, if your standard deductions go from $12,000 to $24,000, that's going to be a lot of money in people's pockets, and they're going to spend it. If you get that the business tax down to 15%, I mean it would be. I mean it would just be such a relief. The boot would be off of the American worker, the businessman, the business owner, and so I'm super excited for it, and I really, really hope we get to see that by the end of the year.
Well, that's like I said, that's going to be our next big hurdle, and I think that having done this Obamacare piece now puts the winds at our backs with regard to a better tax package and more relief for everybody, and a greater opportunity to create more economic growth.
Congressman Rick Crawford, I appreciate it, sir. And when you get the funds and stuff for the flood relief, please let me know. We'll direct people to the website so they can donate.
Will do. Appreciate it. Thanks,
All
Paul.
right. Have a great weekend.